Okay, welcome back. We're going to be doing the writing strategies today. This is one of the, in my opinion, easier sections of the test. I think that so long as you're aware of the general principles of English grammar and know how to read within the context and infer very little, then you should be able to score pretty well on this section. Um, I'm going to try to emphasize certain things as we go along. I've got SAT College Board test number 9, which I'll put a link to in the description below. Feel free to download one now, pause the video, do it ahead of time, do it along with me. Whatever order makes sense to you. But my goal today is to show you how I would approach these kinds of questions. Somebody who's been tutoring SAT for 9, coming on 10 years, has a lot of experience with this kind of stuff. I've done this test a million times with students and coached them through the concepts and content on this. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize to anybody who's watching is that we got to go beyond just memorizing the information. We want to make sure that you understand what the concepts are. And this goes for the math section, the reading section, doesn't matter what you're doing. If you understand the material, it's going to be much more beneficial for you, both in regards to your scores on this test and also your schoolwork, your essay composition, anything that you're doing. And I don't want to sound too overly philosophical about that, but I do really mean it. Try to understand what each of these questions is trying to test you on, and it makes it a lot easier to arrive at the correct answer. It's not merely about memorizing certain things. Granted, there is a certain amount of memorization that has to happen. It's more about understanding how English grammar and rhetorical skills works within a paragraph. So without much more prelude, let's go ahead and dive in on this section. Some general strategies for the writing and language section. You want to make sure that you name or articulate what you're being tested on before you begin evaluating it. So just glancing over the answer choices should be enough for us to narrow down the focus on what we think we should be responding with, or at least paying attention to. So looking at a question like number 1 here, it's fairly obvious that if you look at these, like watch is fairly simple. Observe and see mean the same thing. Visually watch, very similar meaning. Watch and observe mean the same thing. This test item is testing our ability to sense repetition. So if we're being tested on repetition and redundancy, that kind of thing, we want to cut out any repetition. So very simply, the answer here must be B. So again, to reiterate, we want to name what we're being tested on so that we know what to pay attention to. Don't even have to read the sentence on that one. I usually really hammer home with the kids who train with me that you got to read the whole sentence to know what's going on. But if it's a repetition and redundancy thing and it's that obvious, just pick and move on. The next one here is a sentence placement question. I did a whole video on sentence placement. I recommend you go check it out. Maybe I'll put a card up in the corner here, over there maybe, and you can go watch that. But the 3 things that you want to pay attention to here are pronouns, transitions, and flow. So let's see how that works out here. So a sentence 5, it's got this pronoun here, that. If I'm going to say that depth, there better be a depth in the sentence that's before this. So at that depth, water pressure suppresses the explosive force, so volcanic eruptions allowing scientists to watch and observe, or just watch them close up via remotely operated vehicles. So this has to have a depth before it, and it has to come before any analysis of what the scientists are seeing, because they have to see it before they report on it, right? So we've got a logical flow there and a pronoun. So the sentence before this clearly does not have a depth. So let's check our option after sentence 1. More than 1,700 feet under the ocean surface. There's a depth. After sentence 2, that's a height. Sentence 3 doesn't give a depth. So clearly this must be after sentence 1. So pay attention to pronouns, transitions, logical flow. And really, I want to emphasize that strategy of name what you're being tested on. So on number 3, we're being tested on transition words. And you can very easily see, nevertheless, afterward, furthermore, similarly, these all transition from one idea to another. And when you're doing transition words, after you've identified that it is indeed a transition, you want to make sure that you identify what the meaning of each transition is and which one of these 4 things would be appropriate for the existing context. So here we have a contrast, we have time sequence, we have kind of like an and or saying also, an elaboration, and then a similarity that just means what it says. So let's see what we got. NW1 rota, or NW rota 1 is far below the ocean's photozone where sunlight deprives photosynthesis, or drives photosynthesis. So these are below where light is. Bacteria supporting food web have adapted to the dark. So even though, that would be a way to join these, even though they are beyond where photosynthesis can occur, bacteria have adapted to the dark. So because I say even though, and that kind of makes sense, I know that a contrast would be the most appropriate approach to that. So again, name what you're being tested on, itemize the conditions that would make each option valid, and see which one of those options is present in the text. Number 4, pronouns. Really get sensitive to parts of speech. Like here we've got conjunctions also and that kind of thing. Pronouns is a commonly tested item, and with pronouns there are 2 things we can be tested on. 1 is number, and 2, gender. I guess 3 could be case. Number, the singular versus plural, the difference between it and they. Gender, the difference between he, she, and it. And case, the difference between it, they, and them. Or it, those, and them. Yeah. I guess the gender neutral one is ambiguous. So he, him, his. Those are the 3 cases. He is subjective, him is objective, and his is possessive. So let's see what's going on here. We have him or her. Those are objective singular. We have one, gender neutral. Them, objective plural. And it, singular. So I'm thinking this might be about number, because we have 3 that are singular, him, one, it, and 1 that is plural, them. Usually the odd man out can be the indicator of what you're being tested on. And all this has to happen in a flash, so you got to practice this until you really got it down. So what is this referring to? The bacteria, plural, have evolved to use hydrogens. And if you're not sure what number the subject is, pay attention to the verb, because the verb can also tell you what the number of the subject is. Have is plural. So, processes to support what? To support either the processes or the bacteria. In either case, it's plural. So my intuition there would be correct that it is them. Odd man out is a good way to go on those. If you see an also, I don't have a but also. I oftentimes look for a not only, because it might be a not only but also kind of pairing. So with the ands, I'm thinking either a list or a compound. And I don't have this memorized, even though I've done this test a bunch. I don't memorize this stuff. I just understand it and I do it really quickly. So you're seeing me actually think through these things as I go through this. Because I'm lazy. I don't want to memorize all the tests that I have, all the different tests that I have access to. I just memorize or understand the rules at play, and you don't have to memorize them. So let's see what we got. It looks like a list. The heat that drives chemical reactions that remove oxygen, sulfates, and other chemicals. So it is indeed a list. This with removes, they've already said remove, so it's kind of a list paired with a redundancy question. But the dead giveaway was like the ands and the commas there. So with ands, think about what's possible, right? Don't just think about what's there, think about what's possible as a strategy here. And that's going to take some practice. You're going to have to do it again and again and again until it becomes intuitive. All right, even before I look at this question, I noticed this dash right here. So let's see. It's punctuation that's changing. The word itself stays the same. Whenever you're dealing with punctuation, pay attention to sentence structure. Sentence structure is key, and specifically in regards to independent clause versus dependent clause. Punctuation will depend on the presence of independent and dependent clauses. If you're a student of mine watching this, get your packet out and turn, I believe this is on pages 4, 5, and 6, and you'll see that the punctuation rules all have patterns related to independent and dependent clauses. So let's inventory what we've got here. We've got a comma, which has 5 uses that they will typically test you on, using independent and dependent clauses variously. We've got a semicolon, which requires an independent clause on the left and an independent clause on the right. We've got a dash, which requires either independent clause followed by any kind of thing, or that noun, that removable phrase, noun dependent clause dash verb, which I think we're going to have here because of this dash right there. Or we have no punctuation. This dash right here I think is key, because the only 2 ways that you can possibly use a dash are independent clause followed by anything, or noun dash verb. Sorry for my handwriting there. Make that bigger. So noun dash dependent clause, or a description phrase. It doesn't have to be a dependent clause. It could be any kind of description, a non-essential, a positive, a non-restrictive clause, whatever you want to call it. Give it a name. I don't care what you call it. The test doesn't care what you call it. It's removable. A removable description. Grammar teachers everywhere are rolling their eyeballs. Who cares what it's called, though? They're not testing on that. Noun, removable description, and then a verb. You can put the dashes before and after that removable description, so clearly this must be C. Let's make sure you can see the item here. The next one is context driven. You can tell because it gives extra instruction. Anything that gives extra instruction is not testing on grammar rules, it's testing you on context and how things relate to the context. So effectively set up the information in the next sentence. So before you even do that, before you even look at the answer choices, read above and read below and set the conditions for what this sentence must contain. If they're asking you to set up information in the next sentence, this sentence that we choose, we're going to either keep or replace the underlined portion, and whatever sentence we choose has to be a bridge between what came before and what follows after. So let's make sure it does that by setting some boundaries. What must this sentence contain? Shrimp that species, so that species, also graze on bacterial filaments as juveniles. So those are 3 things that might connect here. The species, the eating, or the age. Let's jump ahead to the next sentence. They feed. Okay, eating seems to be a common thread here. They'll eat shrimp, and other organisms that are overcome by the toxic plumes of volcanic ash. So it doesn't say anything about age in the next sentence, so that's not the thread. The species could be the low-yeast shrimp or other organisms, but I do think that this is our concrete, objective hook that we can pay attention to. So let's take a look at our options. Shrimp of that species graze on bacterial filaments resulting from their ability to cope with noxious environment around the volcano. Doesn't say anything about eating. Their adaptations are not yet fully understood. Who cares? Thriving in usually gives that. So telling us what else lives there might be relevant because maybe they eat those things, but that's an inference, and we don't want to infer anything. We want it to be said directly. So I think that's out. There's the age. As adults, their claws are large enough for the shrimp to be predators. There's an eating behavior. So it has 2 clear connections to the sentence before and clearly connects to the sentence after with the feeding, the eating behavior. So look on context-driven questions like these, look for those clear, concrete, objective connections in the sentence before and after and decide appropriately based on that. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about that's beneficial, not just on a test like this, but it's going to be beneficial for your own writing. If you understand that sentences have to be clearly, concretely connected within a paragraph, your writing will be benefiting from that. You want to make sure that you don't skip information or force your reader to infer things that you haven't clearly stated. So that's what they're testing us on here. As long as we understand that, we can make sure that we're going to get each item correct. All right, here they're asking us to combine these sentences, usually with these couple things to avoid. Avoid, if you can, compound sentence. A compound sentence uses something like a comma and or a comma but. They typically are not the correct answer here, and avoid semicolons. If you think about it, those two things don't truly join the two sentences together. So if your task is to combine the sentences, actually combine them. Turn one of the sentences into a dependent clause that describes the other. So that's what we're typically going to want to do. So just a first pass here, this has a compound sentence, so I'm pretty well going to eliminate that. This is a compound verb, that's usually pretty good. And then these others could work depending on what it says, so let's check. During underwater eruption, steam quickly condenses and leaves only carbon dioxide bubbles and droplets. So I kind of like A, because the steam condenses and leaves only carbon dioxide bubbles. Having to leave, creating a necessity there, weird. Thereafter leaving. It means the same thing as A but adds a word, so go with A on that one. The simpler the better. Compound verbs are usually a good way to go on that. Number 9, again, identify what you're being tested on. That strategy is not going to change. Those of is a dead giveaway that we're comparing things. And yeah, there's the that of. So comparisons have to be, comparisons have to have the same type and number. So what do I mean by that? So the two objects being compared, if I'm going to say that doctors' salaries are typically greater than the salaries of teachers. The salaries are the two things being compared, and they have to both be plural, and they both have to be salaries. I can't say that the salaries of doctors are typically greater than teachers, because that would mean salaries are greater than teachers, and those are not the same type of thing. And of course you can see how this would mix up with number as well. So the same type, same number. Let's see what's going on here. This means that water near NW Rota 1, the water is our first object of comparison. The water is more acidic than what? That of stomach acid. The water of stomach acid, because that's what that would refer to. That of refers to the first object in the comparison. The water is more acidic than the water of stomach acid. I don't think that's how people would typically say this. Those is plural, so that's pretty well out. The water is more acidic than the acid from stomach. No, I think it's just straight up stomach acid. The water near this place is more acidic than stomach acid. I think it's just a direct comparison. I don't think we need to worry about saying a that of or those of in this case, even though that's more commonly the best option. Again, here, identifying what we're being tested on, we've got apostrophes floating around. With apostrophes, ask yourself 2 questions. 1, are there 2 nouns? 2, does the first own the second? If there are 2 nouns and the first one owns the second one, not literally or legally, but has like grammatical ownership, then go ahead and put the apostrophe on it. Don't even really worry about singular or plural possessive, because they will usually only give you one correct option. If it comes down to it, just remember that apostrophe S is typically singular, and then S apostrophe is typically plural. English being English, there are some exceptions to that. Okay, so the world's oceans absorb more carbon. So the world is a noun, oceans is a noun. plural noun. The world has oceans, so there are two nouns, and the first one has ownership over the second one, grammatically speaking. So do not put an apostrophe on the second one because oceans do not own absorb. Absorb is not a noun. So that gets rid of A and B. We do want the apostrophe, so it is indeed C. And you'll see how they funnel you into the correct answer if you articulate these ideas. If you systematically approach these things in this way and you build this into your intuition, the answer presents itself. All right, finally, number 11 is the end of this passage. In this one, they're asking us to either insert or remove a part of a sentence. Usually it's a whole sentence or a part of a sentence. In this regard, it's adding a description. Carbon dioxide, which increases their acidity. Let's see how that's used in the context. Again, some questions to ask yourself here. One, is it relevant? Is this information necessary or relevant at this stage in the passage? It might be relevant to the passage at large or as a whole, but we want to ask, is it relevant to the immediate sentence? Maybe even the immediate paragraph. So narrow your focus to what's immediately before and immediately after and ask, is this relevant at this point? 2, does it add precision? Does this add a example, a description of something, a definition? If it's relevant and adds precision, include it. If it's not relevant or it doesn't add precision, don't include it. And then 3, which answer has the best description or describes it accurately? Describes it accurately. So, is it relevant? Does it add precision? Which answer choice describes it accurately? Again, do this again and again and again until you've got it so that it's your intuition. We want to replace your intuition of what sounds right with what is right. And these 3 things will help you to align yourself with what not only the SAT thinks is good, but also just good writing. If you do these things, you will become a better writer. So let's see, is it relevant? Let's read the sentence. As the carbon dioxide level in Earth's atmosphere rises, the world's oceans absorb more carbon dioxide, which increases their acidity. So we read earlier that the water here is more acidic than stomach acid, so it does seem disjointed without that. If we don't say that this is about acidity, it seems a little weird, because why do we care about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere otherwise? So I do think that that is relevant, and it does indeed, it certainly adds precision. It's adding a description of what the carbon dioxide is doing. So it has nothing to do with evolution, so get rid of that. I do think it's going to be A. It explains why it's relevant. Does it repeat information? No, because we don't have this information about the world's atmosphere earlier. This is about steam in an underwater eruption. This is the first part where they're talking about Earth's atmosphere and the connection between the atmosphere and increased acidity. And it's not irrelevant. It's talking about how the water in the ocean becomes acidic. So that's a brief demonstration on how to read through a passage in a tightly focused kind of way. I think I'm going to cut the video here because it's 20 minutes now, about 23 minutes, and that's a pretty thorough way to approach these things. I'm going to try to regularly go through this kind of thing, maybe focusing on particular kinds of questions, but the purpose of this video today really is to really hammer home that point of identifying what is the topic that the question is asking you about. Is it about sentence placement? Is it about increasing precision or adding relevant detail? Is it about punctuation and sentence structure? Name what it is that you're being tested on. Set the conditions for that item appropriate to what you know in regard to proper usage of punctuation and grammar, proper sentence structure, proper context-driven things, and then answer accordingly. So I hope, if nothing else, you get that takeaway from this video. If you learned something, if you liked what you saw, please do hit like, hit subscribe. It lets me know that what I'm doing is helpful and motivates me to continue doing this kind of thing. So thank you for watching. Please, again, hit that like and subscribe and share it with your friends who are studying for the SAT or just studying English grammar in the first place for enjoyment or pleasure. Good night and good luck.